So Paul's joined us. So Paul, do you want to do a little bit of an intro to Hassan? And then we'll hand over to Hassan to talk us through what is Ripple, if it's not a flavour of ice cream.
So Hassan, I probably should have done a little bit of background on you, but Hassan works at our central team, teaching and learning team, and I believe you also work for ITI, which is our school, one of our schools, which is IT and electrical engineering. And I guess his interest is information technology, and Ripple is one of his babies, I think. Is that fair to say?
That is very accurate.
Cool. I'm glad I got that right. So welcome.
Okay, so I can share my screen. I've got a few slides. I'm hoping to keep my part of the talk pretty short to have more of an active discussion with everyone here. So I'll try to keep this short with a short presentation just to provide some context around this, and then we'll take it from there.
Sounds great. We can see your screen. Cool.
And my slide? Okay. Can I just confirm that you're seeing the slide deck and not? Yeah, all right, perfect. Okay, so a little about Ripple. It started about 2018 that I started thinking about developing a platform. More information can be found at ripplelearning.org if you're interested to find a little bit more about it. I'll do a very quick overview of what it is, some of its key features, the current state, and contact and available support in case there's interest in using it. So really, it's a UQ developed and supported platform that aims to facilitate personalized, active, social, and learner-centered methods of teaching in online or blended learning environments. It is available as a standalone tool and can be integrated into any LMS that supports LTI. At UQ, it is currently integrated into Blackboard, and it is used via Blackboard for courses that are using it within UQ. But for other institutes that were mostly wondering what the tool is like and how it could be used, we've started mostly as a standalone tool where students and instructors can create an account and then use it just to give it a flavor. And if there's interest there, then it might be easier to then look at integrating it into any LTI, any LMS that you use elsewhere. So it has 4 main features that are part of the platform. One of the features is a live formative quiz. Now we're gonna, in the second feature, we're gonna talk about where you get a bank of resources from. But assuming that you have a bank of resources, as both the instructors and students can create content, the platform allows you to develop these from your set of repository, from your resources. You put together a quiz, and you can use that as active learning during session, where you open that up to the students, and students can use any device that they've got to answer any questions in a live setting. This has come a bit more of a focus as we got into COVID-19, as we moved everything online quickly, and it seemed like a good addition at the time to provide this formative live quizzes during lectures. Though it is not perhaps the most novel part of the platform, as there are many other tools that do live formative quizzes as well. But it was more of a request from quite a few UQ courses that got us into adding it in. Learner sourcing part of it is the main aspect of the platform. Really, in my research and in my thinking, my passion has been in terms of how do we get students as experts in training to think and act like experts, and how can we provide them with the training, the opportunity to do so. There's quite a bit of recent literature about learner sourcing and how it could be used within education. a lot of the aspirations for learner sourcing is coming from crowdsourcing, where crowdsourcing has been quite successful in other domains. The main challenge of defining crowdsourcing in education is that crowdsourcing is often developed based on the idea of cheap labor from the crowd, whereas in learner sourcing environments, we redefine it as mutual beneficial partnerships between students and instructors or teaching staff in a way that allows students to develop their creativity, their evaluative judgment, and novelty in developing content while getting minimal supervision and oversight from the instructor team. So the platform enables students to author learning resources. Now, while there's many evidence and past literature that suggests that students have the ability to create quite rigorous resources that in many standards are comparable with those that are created by instructors, not everything they create is going to be. So there's going to be things that are inefficient, there are going to be things that are incorrect. So the platform has a moderation aspect where any resource that's being created is going to go under a formal evaluation, where we've taken much of the workload here from just academic journals. A resource which is submitted is going to be looked at by a number of other students, and they're all going to moderate it using a set of criteria, a decision on whether they think this is a satisfactory resource for learning or whether it needs improvement, and how confident the student is in their assessment. They would also provide some comments to justify their decision and provide feedback in terms of how the resource can be improved. The system then uses consensus algorithms, and it looks at what the students have said, and then makes a decision in terms of whether the resource needs to be approved or whether it needs to be rejected. We try to use algorithms in making these decisions such that they are easy to understand. So explainability of the algorithms we put an emphasis on. At the same time, we do, based on a lot of the literature from crowdsourcing, we do try to rate each individual separately so that we're not just naively taking the mean of what the students have said. So the aim of the platform is to identify those that are better evaluators or creators and give them a higher rating in terms of how their decision is taken into consideration as we try to make judgment about the quality of the resource. The platform also has the ability to request more evaluators to look at a resource if it's a threshold borderline that it doesn't feel like it's ready to make a decision on those. For clear yeses and clear no's, it's easier for it to make the judgment earlier on. Once a resource has gone through this moderation process, affected resources are added to a repository so that other students can use it, and those that have not met the criteria for the course will be sent back to the student with some feedback that they can resubmit it if they wanted to. This rubric, we've gone back and forth a few times around this, and we've done some data-driven analytics to look at what sort of criteria are students actually using when they're trying to make a judgment. And just looking at their comments and doing some tagging of the comments and more qualitative work around that, it seemed like appropriateness of difficulty, encouragement of critical thinking, whether the resource is encouraging that, correctness, clarity, and ease of understanding and alignment with the course content were emerging as things that students are making their decisions based on. The next part of the platform, I think, is more just an adaptive educational platform. Now, adaptive educational platforms have been around for quite some time, from the 1980s, really. The main challenge with adaptive educational systems is that they're very difficult to develop content for. They're expensive because you need experts to develop a large repository of resources, which makes them one, quite expensive, and second, not really well utilized in higher education, where the curriculum is not as standardized as what you expect to get in high schools. So there has been more of it working with high schools, but in higher education, where you get less standardized curriculums between different universities or courses, it has been harder to get them in. The opportunity that we've been seeking is, well, once you've got this large repository of resources, you've solved half of the problem of adaptive educational systems, because now you have a larger repository of resources to work with. So what the platform then does is it looks at engagement of students with a pool of the current resources. The resources being developed are tagged with topics from the course, so the instructor can define what tags are used for tagging resources within a topic. Based on students' interactions with the resources and the sort of assessments and the difficulty level of assessment, they get a correct or incorrect. Ripple approximates students' mastery level across a course topics using visualizations that we hope to develop in such a way that is meaningful and explainable to students. And essentially, underlying, we're just using an ELO algorithm coming from chess, where essentially every time a student answers a question, it is looked at as a competition or a game between the student and the assessment item. If they get it right, their mastery is going to go up. If they get it wrong, it's going to go down. The extent of the change is going to be depending on their current mastery level and the difficulty level of the question. So a student, if they get a really easy question wrong, that's going to be a bigger hit in their mastery. If they're getting a really challenging question wrong, we assume that they're not at that mastery, so the hit to their mastery level is going to be lower. So based on their current learner model, which is what we refer to this as an open learner model, which is openly trying to model the learning, there will be given recommendations in terms of new resources to engage with. We try to go for resources on topics that they're developing mastery, so they haven't developed mastery yet, at the level of difficulty where we think they have a good chance of answering that question right. So we use IRT algorithms mostly to find things that we think they have an 80% chance of getting right. And we recommend things that we think they will have 80% chance of getting right to promote learning and also not discourage them from getting many questions wrong. And finally, the ELO system is self-correcting. So essentially over time, as they answer more questions, the system will better adapt itself to the knowledge of what it has on students. There is another part to the platform around peer learning. It is in earlier pilots, but this came also as a need for students to find partners so that they can learn with one another. We did a various round of just surveys for first-year students, and we found that many of them are finding it challenging to find study partners to study with. So the platform allows you to set up a profile, and then based on set what your availability is in terms of times of the week, and whether you're looking for a study partner, whether you're looking to support someone, or whether you're looking for support, so based on these three different goals. And then the platform, once you've got your information in, will recommend different people that satisfy the criteria of the sort of peers you're looking for. Once two people have mutually wanted to connect with one another, it allows them to see each other's availability and contact in terms of different ways that they can be contacted. And then if a session is scheduled and it's gone ahead, then the platform asks students to evaluate the session in terms of whether they thought it was helpful in their learning or not. Current state, so we've now gone 6 semesters, including the current semester. We've implemented it in 48 offerings across a range of disciplines in medicine, pharmacy, psychology, education, business, computer science, and biosciences. Roughly over 11,000 students so far. They've created 15,000 resources, and the platform has facilitated close to 7,000 interactions and recommendations for those students. We've taken a very research-focused angle in developing the platform. So today, Ripple is being used to support educational research in quite some diverse fields, including adaptive educational systems, crowdsourcing, learner modeling, recommender systems, peer recommendation, and visualization. And we've developed the ability for the platform to conduct ethical, sound, large-scale, randomized quasi-experiments or observational experiments. So anything in case you want to see whether a new edition is having an impact in engagement, in learning. We've developed it so that it can be run as a randomized control experiment. In terms of current focus, as the use of the platform has gone up, we're mostly looking at empowering teachers and recommendations in analytics. So empowering teachers with recommendations in analytics. One of the main things that I think we can best get instructors or experts help on is using spot checking algorithms, where the platform seeks judgment from experts on things where it thinks it will have the most benefit for the system. So we'll have high priority things for instructors to look at. These are resources that the system is very unsure about because they've been reported as incorrect maybe by a few people, or there's high disagreement within the moderation team looking at that, or the possible incorrect answers given by the author because many people are going for another response, which is not the one the author has put as the correct answer, or it flags users that may be misbehaving. They seem to be either randomly clicking, or in their moderation, they're always giving the same grade, like a 5, regardless of how good the resource is, just so that the instructor can have a better sense of what's happening with the platform. Similarly, with mostly just information on the analytics side in terms of what's happening in their course, where there are gaps within the students' knowledge, some reports that they can download as a CSV file, mostly just allowing them to make better sense of what's happening and how they can better align it to their teaching. In terms of support, we've developed this self-serving help center, which is available on the website as well, which provides quite a bit of ability to search and look for things where essentially every time you had a question from someone, we've added it to this help center as a way of looking up for things that most people have needed help with. And we also have our team available via email and Zoom meetings to follow up with any questions that anyone using the platform may have. I might stop there. And thoughts, comments, ideas are greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. That's a great overview, and I'm sure there'll be some questions. So I guess I was kind of thinking, is there some relevance of a tool like this, perhaps, Chris, to some of the FlexApp projects?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Hassan, at University of Melbourne, one of the development initiatives that we're engaged in is how do we develop innovation in large classes, and we call it the plus 300 stream, so 300 or more students in the subject. And boy, as you were discussing this, one of the points that I've been making in a lot of the development work I've been doing is when we partner with students, we can actually get, pardon me, greater impact with less sort of overhead load. And I think you were calling it the supervision load or something similar.
Yeah.
And, I'm wondering, since you've gotten some research, could you speak a little generally about what some of the findings are, especially in applying Ripple in large subject settings?
Sure. I appreciate the question, and it's been quite one of the important things that we've been looking at. This is on the platform. So we've used it in courses, some online courses at Latrobe with over 2,000 students, some face-to-face within UQ courses around 600 to 800 students. And really the amount of engagement you get from students and the type of engagement you get from students, I think very much depends on the context of the course and the instructor and how they're running the platform and how they're using it. This is a first-year psychology course, for example. They have it such that it is, they have an assessment that's tied to it, where every 2 weeks or so students are expected to create and moderate resources. And it does go well with psychology students per se in terms of how they think and how they provide feedback. So this, a little here. So looking at the type of evaluations that students do, seems to be very different in different contexts. The feedback literacy of students and how elaborate they are in terms of the comments they make, and how much, to what extent they're perhaps a little bit more forgiving and they're accepting more of the resources. A lot of it does come back to how the class is being run, I guess, by the instructor. In this course, I think we get close to 25,000 peer reviews from students and a few thousand resources that are developed by the end of the semester. A lot of it is due to being tied and aligned with course objectives and assessment in some way. But I think overall, the sort of surveys that we've done and a few of the more studies that we've done in terms of correlations with improving learning has all been quite positive. So positive experience from students as well as positive impact on learning.
So how have you measure the impact on learning, Hassan?
So the way we did that, I can share the link with you, but we've looked at it in two different studies. One was a study with a class with 500 students where we were using, students can themselves determine whether they want to engage with the platform or not. So you've got two groups, those that are using it, those that are not using it. The challenge with self-selection is that obviously you might get more engaged students that are looking to use the platform. So we use the matching algorithm to match one person from those that were using the platform with one person that wasn't using the platform, based on tying them based on their past GPA, so that they're coming in at the same sort of GPA. And then for those students with it, we saw whether it had an impact in their final grade for this course or not.
Hey, Chris and Tom, this is what really enticed me about Ripple was in large classes, feedback actually is a huge problem. And even student experience tends to be very passive because the focus is pretty much on content. So the way I was looking at Ripple was this has the potential to actually engage students in a much more meaningful way, at least bare minimum in creating something which seems to be absent in a large class. So I'm thinking that because you are exploring that at Melbourne and we're also kind of like exploring this at Sydney, could this become a sub theme for us for the mobile SIG to continue, and maybe Hassan can be part of the mini subgroup looking at learning and teaching at scale? Because I think another thing Hassan hasn't really said is, which we are looking at, is AI, which is what Hassan calls algorithms. So it's in the background, which is looking at and applying different mathematics to see what the students are doing, how they're doing it, what the other student is doing, is trying to connect that sort of, that's what we are also looking at. So maybe Hassan can talk to that about a bit.
Sure. So the parts of the AI, the use of algorithms we've got are a few different parts. One part is here when we are spot checking and finding resources that we want the instructor to spot check. So these are things that have a medium priority for reviewing for instructor for the time being. Depending on the set for smart moderation in terms of what you want to be looked at, the instructor can get in and look at resources where students might not have either reached consensus, or the people that have been looking at it have been doing a bad job, or some of the students that have been doing this have been flagged as people that are not appropriately moderating. And then at this point, the instructor will come in and they will have a final say. So the way that the moderation works is it's either community-led and the students make a decision, and that will be the consensus of what they all thought together. But any instructor call in terms of the decision they make is going to overrule what students have said. And if the decision is satisfactory, great, or outstanding, the resource will be added to the repository. If it needs improvement or it will be denied. So coming up with the things that we want the instructors to look at has been one of the parts where we've used some AI algorithms, and the other part is around how we model students. I haven't done anything in this course, so I don't have a model here. but how we model students and then what we recommend to students. So they can either look at the recommendations that we're providing or just sort it themselves in any way they like. If you're familiar with the PeerWise platform that's being developed by Paul Danny in Auckland, I was a big user of PeerWise back in 2010 and 11, and some of the inspiration is taken from PeerWise.
That was my question. Hassan, was, how does this compare to, PeerWise, and what's the main differences?
And at the time, I was mostly trying to find a better way of collaborating with Paul and his team in terms of perhaps just updating PeerWise. But it seemed quite tricky because it wasn't open source, so we had some discussions, and then essentially this emerged as a new tool. But the main differences or the main challenges I had in PeerWise was that the students' created content was not being moderated, and everything was automatically being added to the repository, which led to many ineffective resources being added to the repository. It also didn't have any recommender system involved, so that there was no recommendation or personalization per student. And it wasn't any learner modeling to look at how each student is being modeled separately. Were the three main things that I wanted to bring in, which were not presented in PeerWise at this time.
Sounds great. Sounds like a lot of work.
It has been quite a lot of work.
Does the platform work?
Sorry, I missed. Does it work on
a phone?
It does. So we've done. Yes, but obviously it could be improved. So, for example, if I just make it smaller, it goes into a second form. Perhaps it would be ideal for creating resources, but for answering resources and evaluating, it's pretty usable on a phone as well.
So is the back end cloud-based, and you just need a web browser to access it on a mobile device?
Correct. So it is just a web app, and the URL is what students use to just connect to it.
So will they be able to access their camera? So if they're recording, they wanted to record a small reflection or maybe take a picture of something, that should be doable?
Yeah, so that was perhaps another difference between this and PeerWise is we're extending in terms of the types of resources you can have. And not everything needs to be a multiple choice question or answer. It could be work examples, or it could be a note. And for each of these, you will tag it with related topics, the topics teaching team, and then essentially your content here could insert tables, media, link, images, anything that you might have. It does require the media to be hosted somewhere else, though, because
right.
So you can import it in.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I played around with it. That's what I figured, that maybe it needs to be somewhere, and then you can set the link.
Yeah.
Can I ask
So I assume the other, sorry, Chris, the other difference between PeerWise and this would be presumably this is a slightly more modern interface, and probably doesn't have to carry the baggage that PeerWise has been around for quite a while.
Yeah. PeerWise at the time I think was a genius idea, but it hasn't kept up with the web development frameworks, and it is using more of an older framework. Right?
Chris.
Hassan, could you say a little about what the learning curve is for the instructor and the student who might come into using Ripple?
And I appreciate the question. We have tried to put in quite a bit of work around usability studies, just bringing in a new person that hasn't seen the platform and observe them in terms of how they play around with the platform. We've had overall very little high-level issues with usability issues. I think most of the courses that have used it perhaps have done a 1 or 2 minute sort of showcase of the platform, similar to how I would have been at the beginning of one of the lectures, and that seems to have been sufficient for the students to just pick it up after that. We also do add some information the first time that a student or an instructor logs into the platform. There's also some onboarding slides that allows them to see what are the expectations are for in terms of how you create, moderate, what does the learning model at the top mean.
Hassan, I'm just thinking about the resources students create. Do the resources roll over for the next semester?
Not automatically, but we do have an import function that allows you to, based on the topics that you're using or specific IDs. So I can look at particular topics that I'm using in my course and look across past offerings or my own past offering for a particular offering or all offerings to see if I want to refresh and bring things over.
So, and that will bring across the student resources as well, those which were moderated and they were useful?
Correct. So it will look through everything. It will bring it over without the identity of the student, and it will just be called imported resources.
Right.
So it would be brought over, following up on Vikal's point, it would be brought over and imported by, for example, the instructor. But I'm also, I'm interested in this too in terms of the potential as a student-generated portfolio. Does the student have the opportunity to draw from Ripple in order to kind of follow themselves through their course?
Create an evidence base of output as well.
Right, exactly. Could they potentially draw from Ripple in order to develop an evidence-based portfolio that's not tethered to an individual subject?
We've thought about that. The current version does mostly rely on a course per se to be in place. But it is also possible to use it broadly, more broadly than a course, maybe within a program, where in that program, the topics are no longer going to be the topics of a course, but then within the program, each topic is a course. So then you can have it across multiple courses. But we haven't actually experienced it much there. We have experienced it in learning communities. For example, we have a GTA program where we have students that go for a associate fellowship, mostly PhD students that want to get an associate fellowship around their teaching portfolios. And in that environment, the resources are more their reflections about, they've observed someone teach, or their reflections about their teaching philosophy. And then other people reflect on the teaching philosophies that they've done and provide feedback to one another. So some sort of community where people can help one another based on the learning environment that they're in.
So Hassan, just on what Chris is asking. So if I'm a student and if I have done year 1, 2, and 3, if I go and visit my profile, will any of the resources come under my profile that I've created for the 3 years?
Per course. So everything is at a per course level. So you can look at, for example, your practice, create, moderate, and you've got history of those, which tells you this will be your moderation history of everything you've moderated. For everything you've created, you can look at those. But in its current form, there's no sense of a portfolio that lends itself.
So I'm thinking that the portfolio
on our roadmap.
Yeah. But the portfolio function is not currently there, but at least you've got your repository that you can access, and then maybe, is it embeddable? Like, can you share a link? Like, if you're creating, is it possible? Or does it stay within?
No. So the offering is closed to the course. I mean, it is dependent on the instructor whether they want to make it public, the course public or not. But to get to the course, they would need a Ripple account. You could, as a current, I guess, a workflow for the time being, you could just use the information you've got and just copy paste these out to a portfolio that you want. So, you've got evidence that you've moderated this many resources you've created, and this is your learning repository, and this is your learning model in terms of how well you know the content of that course. But at this point, it's more about the person taking the ownership of bringing them over rather than the tool providing that.
Right. And I think the reason why we're kind of pursuing this too is that a critical feature that you've talked about, Hassan, is student ownership and the idea of assuming ownership. And of course, when I think about this, I think then about the student being able to assemble something that from their point of view is a portfolio of what it is they've done. And of course, from their point of view, it's not necessarily compartmentalized subject by subject so much as it is traveling with the student.
Yeah, it goes beyond the course, yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah, so once the course is finished, do the students get access to that data anymore or not?
The access is there for any course that you're in, so that doesn't disappear. We've, I guess, mostly been thinking about it, how do we allow the students to self-regulate within the course? So for example, you can see where you're struggling and where your current challenges are, and perhaps then you can zoom in on the topics that you think you need to be working on more. So giving you more of an overview of where your learning is at, and then resources to help you further progress with it. But we haven't had the bigger vision of where you go after that yet. I mean, in the roadmaps we do, but we just haven't got to actually bringing it out and having it developed yet.
Would you think that would be hard to do, to bring into it basically a portfolio function?
We thought it required some mapping of that it wouldn't just be a set of courses, but there's a mapping of the courses and the topics and how they relate to one another, and how, for example, what you've done in a particular topic here may relate to another topic in another course. So perhaps the naive approach of just taking what you've done and putting them all together might be relatively easier, but a meaningful portfolio that had the connections of all the different things you've done tied together, we thought is probably more complicated to do.
So Hassan, just following on Tom's question, if we wanted to collaborate on this, what opportunities are there? Like if we wanted something, say for example, portfolio, not like a portfolio system on its own, but at least being able to embed something. Because what I'm thinking here at Sydney, we've got assurance of learning. So that is on top of a certificate that the students get. They also get sort of a thing that says that these students have scored this in terms of these criteria is an assurance of learning from Sydney Uni. So this is something that's ongoing. So at the moment, what happens is that happens in a semester where students can very easily go, look, I've created these things. It has already been moderated. Here's the score, and they actually automatically get a score. So something like that. So if we wanted to collaborate and maybe design something that works mutually across a group of people across the institute, is that possible?
I appreciate the question, and it's an interesting one. So the platform is free to use, but it's not open source. So the source code is not shared. I guess our main vision has been around developing the best learner sourcing environment, where students are developing learner sourcing and the best way of getting the moderations and having effective minimal supervision from instructors. I don't know if it would be the best tool for a reflective sort of portfolio for students to develop, and perhaps there might be other tools that are better suited for that portfolio aspect. We've taken the process of, can we engage them and partner them in a course to help them improve their learning? And that is currently where our main focus is on. Now, there's data that you can get from the platform, and then students can use, for example, in a portfolio. But I don't know what might be possible, at least in the shorter term, in terms of having the platform do automatic things around that.
Yeah, the way you're describing it, that's exactly what I'm thinking is that this could pipe into a more purposeful portfolio system, providing both artifacts, but then also potentially data. And because within Ripple, as part of the student's assumption of self-regulation and ownership, they may be developing the same characteristics we would expect. We might expect that this would upskill them towards then the reflective process. But I agree, what I'm seeing doesn't necessarily lend itself to an actual portfolio platform. Would you
No,
say
I
that's
was
an accurate?
kind of thinking something a bit like Publons, where you could export, from Ripple into, any portfolio type of thing.
That seems to me like it would be a far easier thing to be on the roadmap than necessarily attempting to build that in within Ripple. So I think Tom is right, spot on. I would probably think a very quick and easy way to do import export into a set of target platforms like Mahara or something like that, using a system like Publons. Yeah.
This is what they get in terms of a profile for a course. So a student will get a profile that looks at their engagement, their current performance, the achievements in terms of engagement and competencies they've received, closest achievements that they're working toward, and resources that they've offered. Now, we are looking to expand this a little in terms of more actionable insights in terms of what the system prompts on the student to do. But all of the thinking is still more around the course level, because the entire design is around how you're interacting with the course, at least for the time being.
Yeah, but even something like you've got the course engagement diagram there, that could be turned into like a badge, an exportable badge or something. It is.
So engagement achievements, you've done this many awards, and this is how many things you've authored.
Yeah. In fact, if you could scroll back
so
up.
There are different achievements.
Yeah, I think, yeah, right there. I mean, first of all, the badge is fantastic, but I'm looking at this beautiful course engagement thing, and it's like immediately I could see, great. So that simply gets imported right into a portfolio platform. And then of course, the student engages in a bit of narrative, reflective narrative on, well, yeah, but what does that actually mean?
Yeah, unpacking it. There's another form of reflection, critical reflection.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even if it's a course level, you could say, a student could say, okay, look, I take it that we're using course in terms of how we use subject, right? Like an individual, like 12, 13 week course of study. In that case, right. Okay, so the student could look at that and say, well, this is what this is what happened in this particular course, and this is what this means in the broader context of my entire degree program. Like, yeah, there's plenty of opportunity.
Sorry, Hassan, I just have to say we are just excited. It's not a criticism of your app.
Yes.
It's just that it offers so many possibilities that our creative juices are just running.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're just brainstorming off the cuff here, so.
Absolutely. Very, very appreciated as well. Yeah, I think for the majority of the students, I guess perhaps those that are a little less reflective and trying to go beyond an actual course and try to have these portfolios, we've developed this mostly with the bigger audience of every student in mind, and see how we can get them to think more novelty in terms of developing evaluative judgment and novelty. But a lot of opportunities, as you said, about how do you then get students to own the data they've produced and provide evidence of what they've done beyond the platform, and how do you get them to present those. This is just a leaderboard on the system where it could also show students in terms of where they're at, how many things they've got right or wrong, and then it shows the top 10 or 20 for the students, but the instructors can see everyone within the course and how everybody is tracking here. I'll quickly just show this one as well. This one, this is the part where you can do things in class. This was perhaps a little less the initial focus of the platform. But essentially, once you've got this large repository of resources, it's easy to just bring them to class and have active learning aspects around it. So this, for example, was done in class. 178 students responded to it. The way it works is the instructor opens it up, students answer, the instructor then closes the poll, and then you can see what the responses were. Compared to many just polling tools, the good thing is that it's possible to later see the questions and the results, and we do have it such that you can download the results in terms of who got what right and who was attending the session. So it's also some information about what's going on in the class as well. And this has become one of the parts which is also used in quite a few courses at UQ. It's perhaps a little easier to use. I think using the learner sourcing takes a little bit more of thought and active consideration of how you can align that to your assessment and course. Whereas this part is pretty easy to just use in any synchronous Zoom or in face-to-face session just to get students more engaged.
Great. Well, thank you, Hassan. It certainly got people thinking. So are there any other questions for Hassan? Yeah, Neil.
You're on mute, Neil.
Thanks, Hassan. That's really interesting. I noticed you got a leaderboard for the students and the number of resources that they've created. Are there any which might be an incentive for some type of students to add to the resource repository? Are there any other kinds of incentives or conversely penalties for students that don't make resources?
We also introduced awards, sort of like weekly awards that every Sunday it looks at the most effective resource of the week or most engaged student of the week. And then how the instructor brings them to life within their course and whether they put an emphasis on it, you know, whether it gets a mention somewhere. So that's what we've got beyond the leaderships. We've got the awards as well as these achievements that the students can see on their own profiles. No punishments per se, unless it is tied to assessment in some way. So for example, some courses have that you need to create a resource every few weeks. And then they use that as assessment towards their course. And given that evaluative judgment and novelty, you know, things that fit closely with actually graduate attributes, it's easy to tie it to graduate attributes within the course and then use this for assessment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
But to your point, we've mostly focused on developing a platform that allows these three main aspects of learning to happen. And now really we're thinking back about going back and finding better ways of engaging students in meaningful ways here. One of the challenges we've been facing is this open learner model. How do you design these open learner models so that they both accurately represent students as learning, but at the same time, they promote good behavior and they promote students to engage rather than try to game the system. For example, to look for easy questions to do, or some students, based on the sort of interviews we've done or surveys, at some point, given that they've developed being distinguished or mastery, they tend to disengage because they are worried that if they get a question wrong, you know, their points will be taken away. And I'm like, it's just internet points. You know, we want you to engage further. We don't want you to stop because now you've reached a level. So how do we get students, how do we have these open discussions with students in a way that it only promotes learning and it gets them to self-regulate in a better way, rather than be worried about ways that they might lose points or game the system is an ongoing battle within the platform, I should say.
Cool. Hey, well, thank you very much for your time, Hassan. Thank you, Paul, for organising it for us. And next Friday, we have Meredith Hinds from University of Melbourne. She's going to talk about some of the projects she's been involved in. And then I'll just put into the chat as well a link, just a reminder that the CMOOC starts on the 14th of September. If anyone's interested in being involved in that, would welcome anyone who's keen to be involved. So I think that's us for today. Thank you all. Great to see you all online. I'll put the recording up and tweet the link.
Thank you all for
Thanks,
your
Hassan.
great points. And please do feel free to reach out to me if there was any further discussions that you were interested in.
Great.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really exciting.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you next week. Bye.
See you,
Bye,
Gabriel.
Gabriel.